Hello and welcome to this webinar in AQA's Power and Conflict Poetry Anthology. We are looking at the Emigrée by Rumens to understand the poetic form and structure and ideas, to understand the imagery and language, and to understand a little bit about the context of the poem. Now, this poem is written in first person. It's very much from the voice of the Emigrée. Emigrée actually means immigrant, and it's a more poetic and a kinder word than using immigrant, and also it's less value laden. When we hear the word immigrant, we judge, so it's very much from this young person's perspective who's coming as an immigrant. There are three stanzas that are blocks of text that almost represent the city's walls, and also the lines vary in length, and it represents the upheaval and turbulence in her life as she gets older. There's no regular rhyme scheme or rhythm, and again that's representing that lack of order and lack of control that the Emigrée experiences. And at the end of each line, there are full stops. There's a sense of confinement. Rumens suggests that the city and the country are war-torn, perhaps under a dictatorial government that's banned a language that the speaker once knew. And yet we have this epistrophe. That means you have a repetition of the same word or line or sentence. And at the end of every stanza, that noun, sunlight, is used. Nothing will shake these light-filled memories of a perfect place, despite the fact that this immigrant, this emigrée, has had to flee her homeland, and she's left as a child. And when we think about imagery and language, there's some really important ideas through the use of this poetic language. The writer really gives us a sense of the beauty of the memories and yet the desperation of the reality. The simile of like a hollow doll reminds us of those Russian dolls that are empty, one after another. So it's that idea that her identity has been taken from her, this idea of emptiness, because she's been robbed of her past and robbed of her homeland. And several metaphors are used again to show this sense of desperation and yet the sense of joy that is part of her identity and pride in her national identity, despite the fact that she no longer lives there. She talks about the place being sick with tyrants and this idea of disease and rotting and corruption in this place that is run by dictators that have corrupted a place that she's had to run away from. She talks about time rolls its tank, the idea that time is almost like an aggressor. It's again like the war robbed her of her home and her stability. And she talks about every coloured molecule trying to speak her mother tongue, and it's in pieces. She doesn't have the full control of her mother tongue, and yet it's coloured molecules. There's a sense that there's a love of her mother tongue and a sense of that connection and bond she has with her past. She also uses personification to talk about the fact that this place that she's had to leave as an immigrant, she combs its hair, she loves its shining eyes, the memories are special, and it's almost like a beautiful child, or even perhaps a docile dog, something that gives affection and comfort. And light imagery is used the whole way through, as I've said, the epistrophe with the sunlight, but also she talks about herself being branded with the impression of sunlight and tasting like sunlight. The memories, the synesthesia there, taste like sunlight, something that's intangible and yet very, very present and branded by sunlight, this mix of something that's harsh, branding like an animal, and yet the sunlight that's beautiful. And yet we get the sense that she is not accepted in her current place of residence. They accuse her, they mutter death. That links us very on with the last aspect that we want to consider, is the context. This poem was written in 1993. Now, at the time, 18.2 million men, women and children across the world had lost their homeland due to persecution and violence, and an average of 10,000 refugees a day were forced to flee in 1992. So there were great upheavals on new victims daily. And in May 93, there was international outcry where there were images of refugees, lines of them waiting at the German border to be allowed to claim asylum. And this refugee in this poem has claimed asylum somewhere, but the final stanza shows that she does not feel at home. She's rejected and she's not welcomed in her new country. So the poet really is trying to reflect the hostility that these vulnerable, particularly Syrian refugees, are experienced, and she's really intensifying and creating a sense of sympathy and compassion in the readers. I hope that that's helped you to gain more of an insight into this poem. Thank you for joining me, and see you next time.